He finds her in total darkness and never lets her go again. The tiny male swims up to the enormous female, presses himself against her side, and sinks into her skin as if he wants to stay beside her forever. And he really does stay. His mouth fuses to her body, his skin grows into hers, and then something completely unexpected happens. Their blood vessels merge into one shared system. From this moment on, he stops feeding on his own, stops swimming on his own, and no longer lives as a separate animal. His eyes gradually cloud over and disappear, his internal organs dissolve one by one, and after a while all that's left of an entire creature is a small growth on the female's body. He's given up everything he had just to become part of another being. This isn't fiction, and it isn't a scene from a horror film. This is how life actually works for the deep-sea anglerfish, one of the strangest fish on our planet. And let me promise you right away, stay until the end, because somewhere around the middle, there's something I didn't believe myself at first, not until I'd checked it several times over. Let me start with a little puzzle from the history of science. When researchers first began pulling these fish up from the deep, every single specimen they caught turned out to be female. They were hauled out of the nets by the dozen, studied, carefully described, but there wasn't a single male among them. For decades, scientists believed the species consisted entirely of females, and no one could properly explain how it managed to reproduce. You'll get the answer a bit later, and it will turn everything you've just read on its head. For now, let's get better acquainted with our heroine. Deep-sea anglerfish aren't a single species, but an entire large order of fish, with more than 160 species grouped into 11 families. Among them are the black sea devils, the remarkable fan-fin anglerfish, and dozens of other creatures the average person has never even heard of. And in nearly all of them, the female and the male differ so dramatically that you could easily mistake them for two completely different animals. Take the largest species, known as Ceratias holboeli. The female grows to about 120 centimeters, which makes her a fish the size of a grown child. The male of the same species doesn't even reach 16 centimeters and weighs dozens of times less than his partner. They belong to the same species and share the same name, but side by side they look like a true giant and a tiny speck beside its flank. And it's precisely in this incredible difference that the central mystery of our story is hidden. To understand why nature created such a strange creature, we need to descend to the place where it lives. And it lives very, very deep. Deep-sea anglerfish stay below the 500-meter mark, in the part of the ocean scientists call the midnight zone. This is a place where sunlight never penetrates, not by day, not in summer, not in the clearest weather on the surface. There's always an absolute unbroken blackness down there in which you couldn't make out your own fin. Conditions in this zone are such that almost any animal familiar to us would simply die within seconds. The water presses down with terrifying force because a monstrous column of ocean hangs overhead. The temperature stays just above zero, and the cold there is constant, year after year, without any change. But the harshest test isn't the pressure or the eternal cold, it's hunger. There's almost no living prey in the midnight zone. Food is so rare here that weeks can pass between two successful meals. In a place like this, only those who can wait patiently and never miss a single chance survive. And here the female deep-sea anglerfish reveals herself in all her grim glory. She's built like a nearly perfect hunter for this dark, empty world. Above her jaws sticks out a long, flexible appendage that looks like a fishing rod, and it's from this rod that the entire group of fish gets its name. At the very tip of this rod dangles a small glowing lantern, which scientists call the esca, and it doesn't glow on its own at all. Inside it live special bacteria that can produce real living light, and in return the fish gives them a secure home and protection. It's a tight alliance between two different organisms, and it works almost flawlessly. In the eternal darkness, this tiny light can be seen from far away, and it lures in everything that swims past. A small fish or a shrimp mistakes the soft glow for easy prey and comes closer, right up to that gaping, terrifying mouth. And what happens next is almost instantaneous. The female doesn't chase her victim through the dark water and doesn't snatch it with her teeth in the way we'd normally picture. She throws her enormous mouth open, and at that exact instant, a powerful surge of water rushes inside and literally sucks the prey straight down her throat. The victim doesn't even have time to grasp what's happened. The light that seemed like a long-awaited dinner turns out to be the last thing it ever sees. That's how this fish lives, patient, dark, glowing from within, capable of hanging motionless in the black water for weeks on end, waiting for a single mistake from someone else's hunger. It might seem we've already learned just about everything there is to know about her, but this is exactly where I need to stop and tell you something very important. Everything I've described up to this very moment, the enormous size, the glowing rod, the suction hunting, the solitary life in the midnight zone, all of it applies only to the female. You and I have been talking about just half of this species. The half you can see, the half that got hauled up in nets, the half that for long decades was taken to be the whole and only animal. So where was the male all this time? The same male who started our story, and who eventually turns into a silent growth on someone else's body. Where does he disappear to? How does he manage to find his female in the endless darkness? And why has nature forced him to sacrifice himself for a single purpose? That's what we'll talk about in the second part, along with the solution to that old riddle about the species made up entirely of females. And it's right there that the most incredible part begins. To unravel the mystery we left off with at the end of the previous part, we'll have to go back almost 200 years. Scientists described the very first deep-sea anglerfish back in 1833, and it was a British zoologist named James Yates who did it. Many decades passed after that. These fish were caught again and again, studied under magnifying glasses, sketched, and stored away in museum jars. But only enormous females kept ending up in researchers' hands. The male was nowhere to be found. It was as if he simply didn't exist, and that empty space where half the species should be was driving scientists mad. The answer came unexpectedly, and from a direction no one had been looking. In May of 1924, a scientist named Charles Tate Regan was carefully examining yet another captured female Serratius, and noticed on her side a tiny fish firmly attached to her body. For a long time, no one had paid any attention to growths like these, treating them as parasites, small creatures that had latched onto a large fish for its blood, the way a tick latches onto us. But Regan did what no one before him had done. He decided to take a really close look at this so-called parasite. And what he saw turned the entire science of these fish upside down. The little creature on the female's flank wasn't a parasite at all, and it wasn't a stranger either. It was a male of the very same species, fully grown, ready to reproduce, but forever fused into the body of his enormous partner. So that's where all the missing males had gone. There was no need to look for them in separate nets and separate catches, because the entire time they'd been right in front of the scientists' eyes, fused to the females and dismissed as harmless growths. In 1925, Regan published a special name for this phenomenon, the dwarf parasitic male, and from that moment on, the world learned about one of the strangest love stories on the entire planet. Now let's take a closer look at this male and understand what he's making such a sacrifice for. It isn't born looking anything like what it eventually becomes. A young male has large forward-facing eyes, and in the endless darkness of the deep, it relies above all on its vision, scanning the blackness for a faint light or a familiar scent. And yet nature has dealt with it astonishingly cruelly. It has no stomach of its own and simply cannot feed normally. Its body isn't an independent animal living for itself, but rather a living arrow loosed into the darkness with a single purpose. It has only one task for its entire short life: to find a female in time, find her, or die of hunger alone in the icy water, never having accomplished what it was born for. And then comes the very moment for which its whole brief existence has been waiting. The male finds a female in the boundless darkness, swims right up to her, and bites into her skin. From this instant on, there's no going back. Its tissues begin to fuse with hers. The boundary between the two bodies gradually dissolves, and finally the truly incredible happens. Their bloodstreams merge into one. Now the male receives everything he needs to live directly from the female's blood, and the hunger that once tormented him retreats forever. But for this salvation he pays the highest price. His eyes, once so vital for the search, cloud over and disappear, no longer needed, because there's nothing left to search for. His internal organs shut down one by one and dissolve, and what remains of the once separate creature is, in the end, merely a living growth on another's flank. What was once a whole fish becomes simply part of another body. And here I want to stop and ask you directly, what does it really mean to dissolve into another person so completely that you lose yourself entirely for the sake of a single purpose? The male anglerfish does this in the most literal, bodily sense, and there's nothing else like it anywhere on Earth. Tell me in the comments what you feel when you hear this story: admiration, pity, or perhaps a quiet horror. And now, with the most striking part behind us, let me add a few details that make this picture even more astonishing. It turns out that a single female can carry several such fused males at once, as if bearing on her body a whole little squad of former suitors. When the time comes to reproduce, they all release their seed in the same instant, acting as parts of one organism. Tiny larvae emerge from the eggs, and at the very start of life they stay closer to the surface, in warmer and brighter waters. Only later, as they grow, do they begin their long descent into the dark, down to where the harsh adult life awaits them. And there's one more layer of wonder that can't go unmentioned. The very build of these fish's bodies is fitted to life in the deep as carefully as if a skilled engineer had worked on it. In deep-sea anglerfish, the pelvic fins that ordinary fish have are almost completely gone, and the pectoral fins have shifted to a new position. Their bones have become very light and have lost their former strength as unnecessary, and the entire body is saturated with fat. All of this serves one cunning purpose. So the fish weighs almost nothing in the water and can hang motionless in the black depths of the ocean without spending precious energy on it. In a world where food appears so rarely, conserving every drop of energy becomes a matter of life itself. And so, from a small puzzle about a species made up entirely of females, a whole story grows. A story of sacrifice, of two lives merging into one, and of a body rebuilt down to the last bone for survival. It seems no stranger creature could possibly exist, but the most astonishing part still lies ahead. Because quite recently, literally in our own day, this fish from the eternal darkness suddenly did something no one on Earth expected of it, and we'll talk about that in the third and final part. And what happened next had never occurred in the entire history of observation. In early 2025, off the coast of Tenerife, a team of researchers from a small nonprofit organization called Condrick Tenerife went out to sea to film sharks. They were going about their usual work and weren't expecting any kind of sensation at all. But at one moment, right in front of the camera, near the very surface of the water, in broad daylight, a creature appeared that had no business being there. It was an adult black sea devil, that very same deep-sea anglerfish, alive and swimming in sunlit water. For the first time in history, someone had managed to film an adult of this species not dead and not at tremendous depth, but right here near the surface, in bright daylight. The footage of this fish spread instantly across the entire internet. The strange black creature with its enormous mouth, risen from eternal darkness into our bright world, moved people to the depths of their souls. The fish was fondly nicknamed the Icarus of the Abyss, after the ancient hero who flew too close to the sun. People painted pictures of it, wrote poems for it, and talked about it. People who had never even suspected that such creatures lived somewhere near us. A being from a world the light never reaches suddenly turned up on everyone's phone, and for a few days, the whole world fell in love with this dark and touching fish. To help you grasp just how rare this event was, consider this. Before that encounter off Tenerife, almost no one had ever seen a living black sea devil at all. The only real footage of a living fish of this species was captured by a scientist named Bruce Robison, and only in 2014, using a deep-sea submersible at a depth of about 600 meters in Monterey Bay. Before that, for nearly the entire preceding century, people had known the Black Sea Devil exclusively from dead bodies, from the unfortunate specimens accidentally hauled up from the bottom by heavy fishing trawls. It turns out that in the entire long history of science, a living adult sea devil has been filmed only a handful of times, and each such occasion has been a true celebration for researchers around the world. But the remarkable fate of these fish doesn't end with a single rare encounter. For a long time, scientists thought the deep was a dead end, where life freezes in place and barely changes. After all, there's so little food there, and survival is so difficult that, you'd think, any creature would have its hands full just staying alive, let alone inventing something new. But a study conducted at Rice University in 2024 showed exactly the opposite. It turned out that the ancestors of deep-sea anglerfish once lived near the bottom and then moved out into the open abyss, into that food-poor darkness where there's almost no life. And instead of stagnating, they produced one of the rarest examples of a genuine flourishing. Their body shapes, hunting methods, and ways of life proved more diverse than those of their shallow water relatives living in far richer and more comfortable places. The darkness didn't kill their inventiveness. On the contrary, it forced them to change in 100 different ways. And here it's worth honestly admitting one important thing. We still know astonishingly little about the ocean. A vast part of it remains unstudied, and every new descent into the deep can bring a discovery. Scientists today are still describing new species of anglerfish, and they're helped by a special method in which fish are distinguished not by their outward appearance, but by their genetic code, by the finest differences hidden inside every cell. Using this method, in the waters of the North Atlantic, researchers once managed in a single analysis to tell apart several different species that had previously been confused with one another. This means that creatures still await us in the black water that don't yet even have a name. But the most unexpected thing in this story is that the strange fish from the abyss may actually be able to help people. Remember how the male fuses with the female, how foreign tissues join into one body and aren't rejected. For any other animal, humans included, this would be impossible because our natural defense, our immune system, would inevitably recognize the foreign flesh and start attacking it. But in the female anglerfish, that defense simply doesn't exist in its usual form. It lacks the very internal keys that normally raise the alarm when foreign tissue appears. That's exactly why its body calmly accepts the embedded male as its own. And this property is what makes the anglerfish truly valuable for medicine. For those doctors and scientists who work on organ transplantation and dream of one day learning to join foreign tissue with native tissue just as gently. A humble fish from the eternal darkness suddenly turns out to be living proof that a vertebrate creature can live without the very defense everyone considered essential for life. And now, at the very end, let's come back to where it all began, to the tiny male who dissolves into the body of its female. At the start of our story, this might have seemed something eerie, almost nightmarish. But now, knowing a little more, let's look at it with different eyes. In reality, it isn't horror, but the cold, precise calculation of life itself. In the boundless, dark abyss, meeting another anglerfish is almost impossible. It's the rarest stroke of luck, one that may never come again. And when such luck does come, it's wiser not to let it slip, not to drift apart once more hoping for another encounter, but to merge forever and never lose each other again. The male anglerfish is the only vertebrate in the world that, in the most direct and literal sense, stops being itself so that its lineage can continue. It gives up everything it was, down to the last particle. And now you tell me, what is this story to you? A horrifying sacrifice, or perhaps the purest devotion that exists in the living world? Write about it. I really want to know what you felt, and I'll finish the same way we started. Somewhere right now, this very second, in the icy blackness at enormous depth, a tiny male is swimming toward a faint distant light and finding its female. And if it didn't do this, if millions of such males over millions of years hadn't found their light in the darkness, then neither these astonishing fish, nor this whole story, nor you and I sitting here would exist at all.